Meetup in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Laura Taylor and Josh McIntyre are my cohorts, and they should be joining anytime soon. We're really, really thrilled that Bits and Tokens, Jerome reached out to me several months ago, and they've been hosting our monthly meetups online, through Zoom, through VR. They've just been amazing. So once a month, we're able to get together and share information and meet new people, which is always fun. David Burkett was supposed to come to our meetup. I believe it was in April. I can't remember if it was March or April, but you know, with the pandemic, everything closed down. Pittsburgh is still pretty much closed down. So I wanted to take this opportunity to see if he would come today, and he said yes, which is amazing. So we want to thank David for taking time out of his life and family and joining us today as well. So I'm going to be quiet now. So David, it's all yours.
All right, thanks for having me. So yeah, I'm David Burkett. I'm Grin developer. I'm working on the Mimblewimble extension block for Litecoin. So yeah, that's a little about me. We're gonna talk about, instead of just a plain talk on Mimblewimble, we'll talk more about what features are being worked on now and ways we can improve it in the future. But before we do, we need to talk about something very important. And this is crucial, so everyone needs to pay attention here, okay? So this is not how you spell Mimblewimble, okay? Not at all. This is also not how you spell Mimblewimble, okay? Everybody gets this wrong, but this is how you spell Mimblewimble. There's no capital W, there's no space, all one word. Nearly everybody gets that wrong, but fortunately you will not be one of those people now. So now that I've got that off my chest, let's get started here. So I'll give a quick review of Mimblewimble. There's a ton of tutorials out there, videos of people who are way better at explaining concepts than I am that'll walk you through all about Mimblewimble, but we'll just do a brief overview so you get the general idea. And then we'll talk about some usability issues and ways of mitigating them, because there's the big problem with Mimblewimble is it's hard to use. Like it's a simple protocol at the, you know, the technical level, but from a user's perspective, it's pretty complicated. So there's different proposals for improving it. And then we'll talk about what other cutting edge features are being worked on, what other ways we can improve the protocol and make things even more private, more scalable. So let's get started. All right, first off, there's confidential transactions. So what this means is, like, right now, if you look at the Litecoin blockchain, you can see, you know, 5 Litecoin moving from this address to this address. You'll see 3 Litecoin moving from this address to this address. Everything's transparent. You can just follow money. You learn a lot from that. You learn maybe people's salaries. You learn what they're purchasing. Maybe you can usually identify change outputs based on certain heuristics. But with confidential transactions, that's all hidden. You just have no amounts. There's actually no addresses in Mimblewimble. So there's no possibility of, you know, reusing your address and leaking data that way. You don't learn anything. You don't learn anything about the amounts by seeing it. You just see that coins are moving. They just look like big long numbers that, you know, don't mean anything to most people. You just see coins moving. So that's, you know, that's one big thing with Mimblewimble. But part of the problem with confidential transaction is they're kind of big. They have to have this thing called a range proof attached, which is like, you know, I don't know, it's like 800 bytes or something like that. It's very big compared to for each output. And so, you know, it scales pretty terribly, but there's some clever things that Mimblewimble does that actually improves on that and makes it so it actually scales better than Bitcoin and Litecoin do. And then it also adds privacy in a few other ways. So let's look at this. So this is 2 transactions here. You have the inputs on this side. These are the coins that are being spent. And in Mimblewimble, this is, you know, you don't know the amounts. You just see that there's coins being spent. And then these outputs are you know, the new coins being created. So you create an equivalent, you know, an equal amount of coins on the other side of a transaction. You can't inflate the supply any or anything like that. So let's say this is worth 5 Litecoin and this is worth 3. So you have 8 Litecoin that you're spending, and you can spend 5 here and maybe 3 back to yourself as change, or maybe 6 here and 2 back to yourself as change. But one of these will be the receiving party and one will be the sending party's change in a typical transaction. Yeah, you have these 2 transactions here, and these are created separately, just typical transactions. They're broadcast, but before they make it to a block, one thing that is done with Mimblewimble is they're joined together. You lose the boundary of the different transaction boundaries. You no longer know that these 2 inputs are sent to these outputs. All you see is all of these inputs are involved in the transaction, and all of these outputs are involved, but you don't know the link between them. At least you can't get that directly from the blockchain, because they've all been aggregated together in a way that can't be separated. One other cool thing too is, and this is just called a coin join. I don't know if I mentioned that, but it's just called a coin join. So just like Wasabi and everything else, how that does coin joins, it's actually even easier in Mimblewimble, because you don't have to have a central coordinator that everyone works together with to create this coin join. Instead, every transaction can easily be coin joined by anyone. But one other cool thing here, so we see in this first transaction, it was creating this coin, and then in the second transaction, that coin was actually being spent somewhere else then. The really cool thing about Mimblewimble, and this is what makes it so great for scalability, is when that coin is spent, you delete it. So this is all that's left on chain. You no longer need to know about that coin at all. So when you're doing your initial block download, the initial syncing process, you won't even get that coin. You won't know anything about it. You won't know it ever existed. You just get the unspent outputs. It's called the UTXO set. And because of that property alone, which is called cut through, you end up scaling. This ends up scaling 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 times better than Litecoin does in terms of chain size and initial block download time. It's way better at that, and that's even with confidential transactions, which have those big heavy range proofs I talked about. So this is the general idea of Mimblewimble. There's also these things called excesses, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit here. These are also known as kernels, but we'll get to that. But the general idea is the outputs, the heavy part of them that have the range proof, you can just delete them once they're spent, and you can still verify. You don't need to go download the whole history from the Genesis block, one by one, block 2, block 3, block 4. You don't have to do that anymore. All you need to know about is the coins that haven't been spent yet. So it's really, really great for scalability. But yeah, there's a problem with it, like I mentioned, and that's that you have to interact with the receiver to send coins. It's no longer the receiver just giving you an address and you sending to that address. You and the receiver also have to both work together to build the signature for it. It uses these things called Snore Signatures, okay? And I know it looks like a lot of math, but you don't have to know really what all this means. I just want to have these up here so you kind of have a general idea of the different proposals that are out there for improving it. So real quick, I'll just go through these. So a nonce, it's just like a one-time thing. Every signature, you generate a brand new one, completely random. It's a private thing. You don't want to share it. Then you also have your private key. This is similar to your private key in Litecoin. You can generate an address from it, but you want to keep this secret. And then there's a message. You can sign any arbitrary message. In Grin, we sign the fee of a transaction, but it can be anything here. So then there's a couple parts to this signature. A signature contains the public nonce, which is like, you have your secret nonce here, this one-time generated thing. You can have the public version of it, just the same way you can take a secret key and generate a public key. So, you just multiply it times G, which you don't really need to know how that works, but just know that given a private key, you can generate a public one. That public one is part of the signature, along with this other value that only the owner of, only someone with knowledge of R can calculate, or knowledge of the private key. And they calculate it this way. They have their private nonce, and then they have this E that everybody can calculate. Anyone who knows your public nonce in a message can calculate this E. This is just a hash function. A hash function is just a one-way function that's irreversible. So given any input, you can't guess what the output's going to be without actually performing this operation. So yeah, anyone can calculate this E given those two values, and those are part of the signature, so that's not a problem. And then yeah, if you are able to calculate this S, then that proves that you know the private key R. That's the whole point of the signature. And this is just a basic Schnorr signature. But what Mimblewimble uses in Grin currently is a Schnorr multi-signature. And they're a little more complex. But a property of Schnorr signatures is you can actually take, you can aggregate multiple together. You can create partial signatures so that a multi-sig address, like an address where multiple people have kind of split the key, they can work together and create a signature that validates against the whole thing. So you don't need like in Bitcoin, where if you want to have a multi-sig address, you actually have to have a signature on chain for each individual address in that. Maybe it's a 2 of 3, maybe it's a 3 of 5, or maybe it's a 5 of 5 address or something. Each one of those addresses would need a signature on chain. It scales pretty badly. But with Schnorr, actually, they can work together and build just one single signature. And they do it this way. They basically just add them together. They each commit to their public nonce and their public key, just like before. We'll go back a slide or something if I can. Yeah, so they have their their nonce and their private key. They can generate their public key just like before, but they add a few extra things in here where you add your two nonces together when calculating E. And they also include the public keys here when calculating E. And then if you do that, everybody can calculate E then. Both the sender and the receiver can create part of a signature, this SS and SR, using their own private keys and nonces. And then they can just add them together. So you see the aggregated signature down here. It ends up being the same size. It ends up just being the two S's combined and then the two public nonces combined. And that proves that together they were able to, they know the private keys belonging to their committed public keys. And this is what Grin uses to build transactions, to sign them. But because it requires that interaction, transactions are kind of difficult. And let's see what they look like here. So you have your address. This is where Alice is the receiver in this case. She shares her address with Bob, and this address is just used for encrypting or communicating. And Bob goes and initiates the send. This is where he generates his public key and his public nonce. And he adds his inputs to the transaction. Those are the coins that he wants to spend. And then he gives those over to Alice, and Alice receives them. Okay, and part of the receive just means she generates her public key and public nonce, and then she can go and generate her signature. So if we go back one slide again, so she now has both public nonces from the sender and receiver, and she has both public keys, so she can calculate this E, which means she can calculate her part of the signature, which is this SR equals KR plus E times RR. She's able to calculate that. So then she can give her signature and her output, then her coins that she wants to receive. She gives that back to Bob, who then finalizes it, which means he can then go and create his half of the signature, combine them together into the final signature that is then broadcast and ends up on chain. It's a non-intuitive process, right? You have to send, then receive, which is very confusing already, but then you also have to finalize. And this finalize step is where everyone gets tripped up. Like the receiver always is trying to finalize in Grin, and they're like, why doesn't this work? Well, you actually have to send it back to the sender so they can finish the transaction. So it kind of sucks. But there's things we can do to improve it. And one thing, there's a proposal I created a few weeks ago, and then with the help of Kurt Coleman and John Trump and a few others, we've iterated on it several times, and we have a pretty good proposal, I think, now for making it quite a bit simpler, where we eliminate some steps with a small tweak to the signature here, where we remove this part of it from there. They end up being malleable, which means they can kind of be changed, but you can still verify them. It ends up adding a little complexity to the protocol layer, but nothing crazy. But for the user, it ends up being way simpler. So, everything else is the same. It just removes a little bit from this E value, the calculation of the E value. And what it ends up looking like is, so Alice can just send her address and her public nonce, which is, that part that normally she calculates during the receive step. She now just gives it as part of her address. And then Bob can send to that as many times as he wants. But he generates his own nonce and his own keys for it. He adds his inputs and his change output. Basically everything you need for a transaction except for Alice's part of the signature and her output. And he gives that to Alice. And then Alice can then add her signature. There's no longer this need for this finalized step. And it's a lot more intuitive. So if you are buying something at a store, you might hand cashier $5, and so that's like the send step, and then they'll receive it. So they'll take the dollar. That's a lot easier to reason about. This finalized step never made any sense in a real world. So it's quite a bit simpler. Should get rid of a lot of the usability issues. And I think Grin may end up doing this as long as everything turns out to be secure and safe and good to go. I think that will help them a lot. But we can take it even farther for Litecoin. We can do something that's called non-interactive transactions. And this is kind of like the holy grail of usability. It's like typical Litecoin transactions today, where you don't have to interact with the receiver at all, other than to know their address. Once you know an address, you can just send to someone as many times as you want, as many different values, whatever. So just a standard process. You get a stealth address instead of like an address that ends up on chain. And I can't really go into the details of it. It's a little too complex for the amount of time we have here. But what you really need to know is it's just you add a little extra data to each output, where the sender actually creates the whole transaction. They create an output for the receiver. So they create the coins for the receiver, and then they share the private key with them as part of the on-chain data. So they kind of encrypt it to their stealth address so that only the receiver can then recover that private key. And then there's a little extra validation that takes place, but it ends up being pretty easy to use then, so that only the sender has to create the transaction and send it. So you don't have to have your private keys online. You can use cold storage much easier. It's much safer to use. And it adds a decent bit of complexity to the protocol, so it doesn't look like Grin's going to use it. But I think for Litecoin, the benefits are there. So we're very seriously looking at implementing this as part of the extension block, which would, I hope, really help with adoption, having a very simple to use one-sided send. So that's all for the advanced usability features. There's also other things, other places where we can really improve Mimblewimble. One is with output unlinkability. So a year ago, roughly, some of you may remember there was a big article that came out about how Grin's not private, and it's easy to find the links between outputs on chain or whatever. It was all, or a lot of it was true, not all of it. It was very exaggerated claims and stuff, but the underlying issue has been known since the beginning, which is the links between the inputs and outputs. Let's see. I'm going to skip ahead a little. These links here, they're known at the time these transactions were broadcast. So there's certain ways where we can so nodes that are listening, they can learn those inputs and outputs before they're actually aggregated together. But there's certain things we can do to improve that, so that nodes who are listening to transactions being broadcast on the network don't learn quite as much. And then there's other things we can do, like kernel aggregation. So that's the kernels are the place where the Snore signatures are. That's those excesses that are in the slides. I'll show you those in a minute too. They grow linearly, which means for every transaction, you have to add one of those to the chain. And those can't be pruned currently, unlike the outputs where you can delete them when they're spent. Those always stay, so they continually grow the chain. But there may be ways that we can prevent that growth and limit the size of those as well. And then of course you can do payment channels for Lightning Network or bidirectional payment channels and stuff like that. So let's first talk about unlikability. So yeah, you have these transactions just like before. Each transaction created separately, it's broadcast to the network. Everyone on the network who's listening sees these transactions. They see that these two inputs go to these two outputs. It's not until the block is actually created that that link is added in that obscures everything. So if you look at a historical blockchain, you don't know that these inputs went to these outputs. But anyone who's listening could easily share that info and say, oh, well, I saw those transactions before they were aggregated, and these are the two transactions here. So that's really the biggest downfall of Mimblewimble privacy, and the one area where we could really use some improvement. And there's a few ideas out there for how to do that. One is called pay joins. So you have, in a typical transaction, you have the sender here, it's Bob again. He has his 2 coins that he's spending. He's sending to Alice and he's getting his change back. And when you see this transaction show up on the network, you can automatically assume that these 2 coins, these first 2, the red and green ones here, can you guys see my pointer? I don't know, can someone?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. Okay, so yeah, you see these 2 inputs here as part of the transaction, and then you can automatically assume, oh, those are both owned by Bob, and that gives a lot of data away. You can maybe trace these back and learn a lot about his transaction history from that. But pay joins do it a little differently. Actually, the sender and receiver both contribute inputs to the transaction. So they both are spending coins as part of the transaction, which obscures who the owner of these are. Because seeing this transaction on chain now, you don't know for sure, is this input from Bob, from the sender? Is this input from the sender? We don't know. One could be from the sender, one could be from the receiver, both could be from the sender. It's hard to tell. So it obscures that a little bit. And then of course they both get their outputs over here. That's called a pay join. That's one thing we could do to improve the privacy. And it actually solves a few other problems too. Some replay attacks, which we don't have time to talk about. A few other things, but it's a cool idea that Grin's looking at, and we may use in Litecoin as well. And then there's other things we can do. We use Dandelion to broadcast. Dandelion is a way of like obscuring the origin of a transaction. So if you're a node who's listening to transactions being broadcast on the network, and you see a transaction come from one IP address before you hear from other places, you can assume that's the sender of it. Well, Dandelion has it take several hops first before broadcasting it out to kind of obscure the point of origin. And as part of that, we can actually do the coin join process there, where we get rid of those links here. We add in this part. We can do that as part of Dandelion, and we can make some tweaks to Dandelion so that it kind of favors certain peers, so that they end up aggregating a lot more transactions. And hopefully there's other things we can do too, like maybe payment channel hubs or something like that. Or you can just use a plain coin join server, a trusted entity to coin join them for you before broadcasting them. But there's certain ways that we can help with the unlinkability, and hopefully someone will come up with something even better. This is very much an open problem, but these are our cutting edge solutions for it, or at least ways of improving it. But then there's kernel aggregation. So like I mentioned, you have these excesses down here. These are the Snore signatures that we talked about earlier. They never get removed from the chain. They just continually grow the size of the chain, so that when you have to do the initial block download, you have to go download all those and verify them. One way we may be able to aggregate them all together is if we change curves. There's something called Bls Signatures, which is a lot more complicated than our typical SecP 256K1, which is what Bitcoin and Litecoin use. It's the elliptic curve used. It's something called pairings that have multiple curves involved and some fancier stuff, but they may be able to do it so that our signatures can actually be aggregated together. So you don't need, a separate kernel for each transaction. You just need one for the whole block, maybe, or maybe you can even aggregate them across blocks. So that's one way we could really improve the scalability of the protocol even farther. And then another thing we could do maybe is what was I thinking? Sorry, I lost my train of thought here. When you do the initial block download, you have to download all those kernels. Well, we may actually, since the protocol is so simple, we can possibly use something like a Stark that instead of downloading all the kernels, you just download this proof that probabilistically proves that all of the existing kernels exist, they're valid, they sum to this certain amount that you need to be, that all the signatures are good. So you would end up downloading way less data, and maybe every month or every 6 months or something, someone can generate a new proof to avoid downloading all of that old data again. So that's one option for improving scalability as well, and to getting rid of that linear growth of the chain. And then the last, I know very little about this. I'm not an expert on this area, but there's a number of things we can do with payment channels, just like Bitcoin and Litecoin, how they can have second layer solutions to scalability. You can do the same thing in Mimblewimble, where you have either absolute time locks, where you can't spend that output until a certain height, or relative, where you can't spend it until this other one has been spent for so long. Just there's all kinds of different primitives we can use and build on top of to build these payment channels, so that we can make multiple sends back and forth. So either unidirectional payment channel or a bidirectional one, where we can send coins back and forth and then just broadcast one transaction at the end. So, similar to Lightning. And I believe it's possible to build out a whole Lightning network. I don't know that anyone's done all the legwork for it, but we should be able to get at least pretty close to building a Lightning network on top of Mimblewimble in the future, if ever desired. So we have the same possibilities of scaling in Mimblewimble as we do in Bitcoin. And yeah, that's it for the cutting edge stuff. There may be some things I missed, but there's a lot of different proposals out there. There's a lot of different people thinking about ways that we can make Mimblewimble more usable, more private, more scalable. It's still a very young protocol, so I expect that we'll see it change drastically as time goes on to further improve compared to the existing legacy Litecoin and Bitcoin type coins. So I have some links here for anyone who's interested. There's the extension block proposal. This is how we would actually add Mimblewimble to Litecoin. It's sort of like a side chain, except everybody verifies it. It creates like a separate block on top of each existing block that has only Mimblewimble transactions. And how that's done is all explained in this proposal here. And then this is the actual proposal for adding Mimblewimble to Litecoin. And I'll skip down here. This is the proposal for making non-interactive transactions on Litecoin's Mimblewimble extension block. So the actual one-sided send, where you don't have to work with the receiver anymore. You can just send the coins one way, and no need for being online. And then there's also, this is the original proposal for Mimblewimble. It was just anonymously dropped by someone. There was an onion link posted to the IRC, I think it was the Bitcoin Wizards IRC channel. So it's copied here, where just some random dude dropped the paper there. no idea where it came from. That explained the original proposal for Mimblewimble. And then here's a good explainer for how it actually works for those who really want to dig into the details. And then this is where we discuss eliminating that finalized step. So this is like the improved Litecoin or improved Mimblewimble transactions that removes that third finalized step and makes it so it's just send receive. So you read all about those there. You can reach out to me. I'm on Twitter, Telegram, email, everything's all public. You can search for it. Feel free to contact me at any time with any questions. I'm always happy to walk through these ideas with people. And if anyone has any questions, I can answer them now. I didn't get into any of the math real deep, but if anyone wants to, now's a good time also. So is there a way for me to see questions then? I don't know. I was thinking there would be. Becca, do you know?
Unmute. Yeah, I think Tim, are you going to lead this part? I think we didn't get any through the chat, so I think Tim.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I've got some. I feel like these are more like fun kind of questions, just because you did a really good job explaining everything. I feel like I took away a lot from this. Like I was taking notes the whole time, and I really learned a lot from what you were explaining.
Good, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, and then so like one of the questions that I was going to bring up, you kind of already tackled, where I'm sure we probably all read that article that you were referencing. Where I think it was something like if someone is able to control enough nodes or something, they can kind of see and guess transactions and stuff.
Yeah.
And you're saying that there's some things in the future that can be done to safeguard that. But is there anything like now that stops that, or is that something that's still possible, do you think?
We can build like the pay join solution into Litecoin from the beginning. But yeah, it's still possible. We got to be careful not to blow that too far out of proportion. Linkability is a big thing. When you have resourceful attackers like governments and stuff,
right?
This vanilla Mimblewimble is not private enough. It's not Monero, it's not Zcash. It is more scalable privacy. It's what it is, but it is not, it's not a privacy coin. You have the confidential transactions. So there's three ways you can leak metadata or leak information about a transaction. There's the amounts, and that's almost perfectly solved. There's a few, like you can put an upward limit on how much money is that in that, but it's, we're talking like if you just get a Coinbase, you just mine a Coinbase and then you immediately spend it, it can't be more, like that transaction's worth no more than that amount of that Coinbase. So there's like a limit to how much it can be, but for practical purposes, the amount is unknown. Okay, completely unknown. Another way you leak data is address reuse, and that is also solved by Mimblewimble. You do not reuse addresses. You don't have this long-running address that people keep sending coins to. But then where we fail is the output linkability, like I mentioned, where you can see, these coins go to these coins, and you don't know who any of those are, but maybe you're one of the parties that receives the output. And maybe you can learn something. Maybe you know that some other transaction was involved in some illegal activity due to some police report or something, and maybe they send those coins directly to you, and you can be like, oh, well, you must have been that party that owned them. Or as time goes out, like as more transactions happen, the links get more obscure and it's harder to trace back these things. But as far as like obscuring the transaction history enough to fool governments, we're going to require some additional stuff. So we're not any worse than, we're better off than Bitcoin still. Coin joins are way easier. They're built into the protocol. And if we wanted a coin join server that's trusted, we could do that. We have pay joins you can do on either. There's all kinds of different ways of improving the situation, but yeah, we're a long way from being a Monero or a Zcash for sure. So it's not perfect privacy by any means.
Okay, found the chat. Hey guys, David, thanks for all the hard work you do. Big time appreciate it. To the note about the kind of, I guess you will, the backdoor in the Mimblewimble, is it not a somewhat of a benefit for us, or Litecoin, I guess I would say, that that is not implemented to avoid scrutiny from governments and possible delisting from exchanges, having this fungibility to where we're not able to see what I have in the balance. We're having that confidential transaction, but we're not skirting to get further, regulation that might affect liquidity.
Far outside of my expertise, I can only speculate. But from speaking to exchanges, Charlie has spoken to a lot of them as well as others. It sounds like what we're doing right now, we're not going to get delisted anywhere. Definitely, if we were starting to obscure the links too much, then maybe to where we're a privacy coin that can, governments can't track or whatever, then yeah, I'm sure that would affect some listings. Like Monero is not listed on Coinbase, for example. And yeah, it definitely affects their decision, I'm sure, especially depends where the exchange is located. But yeah, I don't know how much privacy is too much privacy for exchanges. To me, the more the merrier. The hell with exchanges, but there's a good reason that Charlie and other people are leading that part of it to prevent me from going too far. So yeah, that's definitely not in my wheelhouse. I don't know much about that. Yeah.
Thank you.
And then I had a question about so Grin is the wallet.
It is a full node and wallet written in a different language than the core one, but completely compatible with it. Yes, it is written in C++, whereas the Grin node and wallet are written in Rust. It also comes with a GUI and everything. It's the whole package, the whole deal. Yep.
What is the, like, what made you want to write it in C++? Like, what are the advantages, I guess?
Well, back in the day, there were a lot more people looking at Grin, and there were people everywhere like, we need a C++ implementation, and I was like, oh, I'll do that. It's stupid, horrible idea. But yeah, I was like, oh, it sounds like there's a lot of people who want to contribute to this. Almost nobody did. Almost nobody. But having more implementations, it's a simpler protocol, so it's safer to do more implementations, unlike Litecoin and Bitcoin with their complicated script protocols. So it helps with decentralization, which we see a lot with Grid now. Like they have this centralized core team, and I hate it. A lot of people love it. There's already some centralization in the coin. Having a separate implementation where I can push things a different direction is great, I think, for decentralization, for trying out new things. I have a lot of flexibility because I have that separate implementation that I just wouldn't have had if I just built a GUI for the existing one.
Right. And then how long have you been involved with Grin or like with the Mimblewimble protocol? Like
too long. Probably it's been a couple years now. I think it was July of 2018 or something is when I started. Feels like forever ago though. It's been such a busy couple of years. But yeah, I think it's been over 2 years now.
Cool. Yeah, when I first heard of Mimblewimble, I'm like a big Harry Potter fan, like from growing up, and so with that being like the tongue tying curse, it made like perfect sense, like that it was for more privacy or more private transactions, and so like I kind of gravitated towards it to try to learn a little bit about it. But I think you explained everything here today.
That's awesome.
Good. A lot of the questions that I had, so I'm kind of having trouble here with my list because you already answered most of them.
It's a good problem to have.
Yeah, I think as far as like the questions that I have, that's kind of it for me. What is your, like, where can people find you on social media? I know you said that you have Twitter and all that. Like what
yeah, I don't remember. David Burkett 38 maybe. I'm really clever. I use my football number from back in the day because I'm still living in the past. And on Telegram, I think I'm just David Burkett. And on Keybase, I think I'm D Burkett. It's different on every single platform.
Got it.
Yeah, and I think on Bitcoin Talk, I'm Burkett38. Yeah, they're all kinds of combinations of that. They're all me.
Okay.
So just, it's all public too. Like you go to you find me on GitHub. That's just David Burkett, I think.
Okay.
And it links to all the others, as does my Keybase and other things like that. So just search for my name. You'll find me.
Go, Matthew.
Sorry, what was that, Michael?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
So what is the next thing that you're like most excited about? Is it more working with Grin or working with Litecoin?
Right now, I'm most excited about the testnet next month. I'm also very nervous about it because I have a lot of work ahead of me. But yeah, we've got the testnet planned for the end of next month. That it's not going to be like a real usable testnet by everyone, but it's at least going to show Mimblewimble as an extension block on Litecoin, where you can maybe create transactions by command line or something. But there's a lot of different pieces that I've tested individually that I'm yet to test together. So I expect everything to break when I try to do that. So
David,
the next month is going to be very busy but very exciting.
David,
yes?
is that test net that you're talking about doing next, will that be the last step before it's implemented on a large scale? Or
No, we don't have anything on the wallet side. So as far as creating transactions, we don't have anything. This is all about the node side, which is validating and propagating transactions, creating blocks, and that sort of thing. Next, I'll transition to the wallet side, which will be the transaction creation, and preferably focus on non-interactive transactions at that part. That's the next big step.
so
I can't give exact timelines.
No, of course
by
not,
end of year is my expectation that
no,
will be code complete. That doesn't mean it's going to be
right.
adopted then. Then it goes
So
out to the community and miners and everything for them to figure out.
So it sounds like 2021 might be the really big year for Litecoin.
That'll be the year, hopefully, that it gets adopted. I don't know if it'll be beginning, middle, end of year, but I would expect by end of 2021, if it's getting adopted, if the community agrees to it, the miners agree to adopt it, then I would expect it to happen sometime in 2021.
Very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
If I may, I just had a question about the acceptance or the consensus of Mimblewimble. So, I mean, I'm not very technical, so excuse me on that, but I do mine a little bit. I got my little future bit Apollo and a amp miner that's just chugging away there. But for this to get implemented on Litecoin, the work you're doing is, the first step, and then the miners have to accept those transactions. Now, I'm a part of a pool. Like, how does that effectively work in the grand scheme?
You'll want to encourage your pool to signal for adoption of it as soon as some threshold is met. I don't know exactly what the miner signaling is going to look like, but I think probably 85% or something. I don't remember which BIP we're using for signaling support and adopting it, but basically as soon as there's a certain threshold of miners who have signaled that they're ready to accept it, then it will go live. And I think we have also a fallback that if it doesn't reach that amount, it still goes live by a certain point anyways. And if we see that there's no desire to use that feature, then we'll back that out or whatever. But I think there's a fallback that within 1 year of the time that it's merged, it would automatically activate anyway. But Charlie's a better person for those questions, or just, right now, I don't think we have all the answers. It's a community decision, so we have to get more input from others, but we just have a general idea of what we'd like to see anyways.
Right. So, I mean, I guess theoretically, let's say if it does get accepted, I mean, we will probably be mining 2 types of transactions.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
But it won't affect your existing miners or anything. Like the pool will collapse them all for you, and it'll create your extension block, which just ends up being a little, it all gets hashed to this little 32 byte piece that gets added to the last transaction in a block. And that last transaction will look like any other transaction, but it also happens to commit to this whole additional extension block. So from the miner's perspective, they're not even going to see it.
Right.
But the pool will do all that work for them.
David, in that case, is Mimblewimble considered a soft fork addition to the network, or does it require
Extension
a hard
blocks?
fork?
Yes, extension
Okay.
blocks are a soft fork.
Interesting. I know that adds some additional complexity to
Definitely, yeah.
network upgrades.
If we were doing a hard fork, I think it would be easier, but it would easier to implement. But there's obvious downfalls of hard forks. Old nodes would have to update, or they would no longer.
I know.
Yeah.
I know the Bitcoin community in general it usually gravitates towards soft forks and backwards compatibility. Like I do a lot of work with Bitcoin Cash. They tend to take the hard fork approach to network upgrades every couple months or so.
As a network matures,
Different approach.
As a network matures, you almost have to switch towards soft forks, and hard forks have to be planned years in advance. The larger the network grows. As we have worldwide adoption, if we ever see that, hopefully we do someday, hard forks won't be acceptable then. But for now, yeah, coins with smaller communities can pull it off. The smaller the community, the easier it is. Or Bitcoin Cash has a lot of just light clients, is why they get away with that. Most people aren't running a full node already. So as long as they keep the light clients so that they're backward compatible, then it's just the few people running a node have to update. So Bitcoin Cash is in a different situation.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for answering the question, and thanks for all your work on this, man. We really appreciate having you join our meetup.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, David, it's Jim Flanagan.
Hi, Jim.
So I'm kind of really big into getting companies to accept Litecoin as payment. And my question, I don't know if it's off topic or not, but let's say I'm a company that accepts Litecoin and I sell a product to a person, and a couple of days later they come back and want a refund. It was broken or whatever. Is there a simple way for the merchant to give back that purchase the funds?
On the Mimblewimble side, yeah, if we do the non-interactive transactions, it'll be very similar to how you send money back on Litecoin. You're welcome to send it back to the original address that sent it. They're one-time addresses, but you can technically send it back, but you lose some privacy when you do that. Or actually, I think if they commit to their stealth address as part of it, they may be able to do it without leaking privacy. I got to think more about that. But yeah, you should be able to send it back. With regular Mimblewimble, it's a lot harder. But with our non-interactive transactions, there is a way to refund. Yes.
Thanks, because I know with adoption, concerns come up of, like chargebacks on credit cards and stolen identities. And so when a merchant asks questions like, well, how do I give a refund back with volatility? And I try to explain to them that it doesn't matter about volatility. The fiat exchange rate is still going to be the same. If it's $10.50 or whatever, you still give back $10.50. But I just was trying to wrap my head around how that privacy and how that would all work, how they would see the record that you purchased it. I mean, you'd still get maybe a receipt, I guess, and then just say
the wallets. Yeah, the wallets know about transactions. It's just the nodes that don't really know the amounts or anything like that. But the sending and receiving parties, they still have all that information. So yeah, they should be able to have some kind of refund process.
Thanks, David, and it's good to see your face again. Haven't seen you in a while. And I hope to see you at the next summit. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, hopefully there is one.
No, I'm sure there's gonna be one, but it's just a matter of time.
Yeah,
All right. Thanks, bud.
thank you. All right. There, I don't know what kind of time we have now. I don't know how long I've been talking. Sometimes just talk.
We're near the end. It looks
Okay.
like we have no further questions. I see a couple questions in the chat. Alex asked, is there any expectation that Mimblewimble will be contentious enough to cause a chain split?
I find that highly unlikely due to the fact it's a soft fork. If there's only partial support signaled, then it's only miners that can cause the fork. And if there's only partial support for it, then it won't get activated anyways, unless we hit that fallback, which we would deal with that way in advance. But yeah, I find it very, very unlikely. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks for that answer. And
Mhm.
thanks for joining us, David. It's been a pleasure. It's been great to
And
have
yeah, David, last question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to understand, I mean, do Litecoin has an official partner like how we have for Bitcoin? So we have like tokens.net as an SLP partner. So do Litecoin has something similar?
I have no idea.
I mean, okay,
Sorry.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, and okay.
Yeah,
So
does anyone else
another
know?
question.
I don't know.
Okay, okay. And last question. So there are some countries who are trying to adapt. I mean, cryptocurrency as. I mean, they want to deal with cryptocurrency for some kind of a real estate business. So do you think? I mean, Litecoin can be safe when these kind of transactions happen? Because yes, there are countries who are trying to explore these kind of options, like
Yeah.
instead of having transactions on I mean on the banks and everything, they want to do the transactions on cryptocurrency. So do you think that's going to happen with Litecoin, and how safe it's going to be?
I mean, as far as safe, I mean, yeah, things are very safe, right? You don't have the chargebacks that you have to deal with many other things. Now, with buying houses, you don't usually have that anyways, because you have loans and stuff typically. But like for regular payments and stuff, you don't have chargebacks or things like that. So yeah, it's very safe in my opinion. Yep.
No Litecoin hits
The reason
for the houses.
sorry. Yes, Scott. Thanks, Charlie.
Any other questions?
Thanks, David.
Yep.
All right. Looks like we have no further questions. This has been great. Thanks again for joining us. My name's Jerome. I'm using Annalise's her Zoom, but it's all good. I want to thank everybody for joining, for watching the live stream, for being there in alt space, virtual reality. We do events and virtual reality for people to be able to see this and join in, talk, and understand what's going on with this tech. So from Bits and Tokens Blockchain Universe team, we thank you, and everybody have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Stay safe.
Take care.
Yeah.
Thanks, David.
See you. See you. Bye bye.